Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is a Ukraine war news update for the 7th of April 2025. A little bit earlier today than normal, but not that much, and there's still no news of distant strikes, of the usual infographic. You get the blue one with drone icons on it, etc., etc. So unsure of what's happened overnight. There was no news throughout the night in terms of certain OSINT people and whatnot releasing things as time progressed. Missiles in the air, drones in the air, none of that. So I've not seen anything to suggest that there was any activity last night. Of course, one assumes there was activity with regard to Russian drones and Ukrainian drones hitting Russia, although we haven't heard an awful lot about Ukrainian drones of late, and I'm unsure whether that's a dip in activity or there could well be just good OPSEC hitting targets far out in the middle of nowhere, so you don't get imagery turning up on social media. Just unsure. As I record this video, I'll keep an eye on the feeds that might give us an indication of what could have happened, or it was just a really quiet night. After some pretty horrific nights, it has to be said. Right, Ukrainian General Staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply, of course, and you can find them in the description to the video below. They are linked there. 1,350 personnel lost is a pretty significant number, over 1,300. 13 tanks is above the daily average. 25 troop-carrying AFVs is above the daily average. 31 artillery systems likewise. 2 multiple launch rocket systems. We have 70 vehicles and fuel tanks, which is still a significant number, right? But lower than 100, lower than quite significantly lower than we have seen it. And 1 piece of special equipment. Low drone numbers, and we do have quite a few cruise missiles. Now, as you know, the figures for the drones and cruise missiles come at a cutoff that goes halfway through the night before to halfway through to last night. So that is likely, could be suggestive of last night actually being a genuinely quiet night. Those 15 cruise missiles were from the night before, from half of the night before. So actually, there were more missiles sent the night before, and no, that might be the total number that were intercepted. There were more that were sent, but a lot of them got through, and it's about half, or under half the. So I think that's about a third of the drones that were sent through the night before. So that could be the cutoff from the previous night. Okay. So I think that could suggest that last night was a quieter night. Right. Andrew Perpetua has a loss list out, so that's good. But all things considered, that's a fairly decent day for the Ukrainians, consistently attritional, I guess. Andrew Perpetua has a loss list out, and we have about 1-to-1 loss ratio in terms of combat asset losses. They're pretty similar as well. We'll talk about Ukrainian losses being fairly high recently in a thread I'm going to talk you through. In terms of what was lost for the Ukrainians first, we have, again, some UGVs, unmanned ground vehicles. I'm always unsure about the inclusion of things like this on these loss lists. They're about, it can be $5,000, they can be $30,000 or more. It depends who's providing these UGVs. Some are cheap and cheerful, but still useful. And they, they are a different, I guess, case than, I don't know, a Max Pro or a Kurp or a Caesar, right? Caesar 8x8, that's going to be costing well over $1 million. That'll be millions. And comparing that in the same loss list in terms of valuable equipment can be problematic. But of course, Andrew's list isn't about value; it's about just listing what's lost, and different people will derive from this different things. So sometimes, when the point of me going through all this is if you're comparing just the pure numbers here in terms of what's lost, and we've got a bunch of UGVs here for the Ukrainians, and that's not the same value, but you could say the same about the Russians losing a lot of motorcycles and things like that on a consistent basis. Right. We have an electronic warfare system, a Quasar 3M. Quasar 3M. Let's see if this is Anything to get too upset about? I don't know. Ooh, Hungarian could be. I don't know if this is going to take me to a place that's going to show me anything. No, that's something completely different. So who knows what a Kvasar 3M is? But it is listed on the Andrew Perpetual loss list. We have some artillery pieces, a couple of L119s, and a damaged Caesar 8x8. That's going to hurt. That's a fairly expensive and decent bit of kit. Hit by an FPV drone. Got a captured T-64 tank. We have 4 APCs, including FV-103 Spartan. It's a UK provided one, M113. Most of the equipment below artillery, almost all of it is destroyed, abandoned, or captured. So that's irretrievable losses. MRAPs, I say irretrievable. Sometimes you get something that's captured by one side, then captured back by the other side. MRAPs, most of these destroyed. We've got Max Pros, QPs, Cossacks. There's 5 of those, 4 destroyed. A couple of trucks, ATV, and then usual list of civilian vehicles, mainly destroyed. And then at the bottom here, we have civilian vehicles used by civilians. So these aren't military, getting destroyed by the Russians as well. And again, that can skew our sense of how much military equipment is being attrited. But obviously useful for Andrew to do that, as different people looking at these lists for different reasons. But if we're being if I was being hyper anal about this, for my purposes, I'd probably take out the 3 UGVs up there, take out the black ones at the bottom there, and then that might change the list a little bit. But I'm not trying to be beneficial to the Ukrainians, just trying to get a sense of like for like and whatnot. Okay, then we'll look at the Russian losses, and we have Estrela 10 air defense system being damaged. That's obviously good news for Ukrainians. That's a higher value bit of kit than a lot of the other stuff. Command and control piece destroyed there, but that is from 2023. 3 artillery pieces. We've got 4 tanks, a couple of those being track guard and sheds, so 50% of those today, track guard and sheds. IFVs, I guess the proportion that are destroyed to damage is marginally better for the Russians here, but there's not a huge sample size. 4 IFVs, half of them irretrievably lost. 3 AFVs and 4 APCs. So nothing crazy. Strata 10 is going to hurt a little bit there. And then we've got quite a few trucks compared to the Ukrainians. We've got some ATVs and a whole host of civilian vehicles, but not as big as sometimes that we've seen. A couple of motorcycles there at the end. So broadly, fairly similar, I think, lists, as in the impact of those losses on both sides. Okay, now here we have a thread from Dmitri Alperovitch that says March was the worst month of the war for the ratio of total Ukrainian to Russian equipment losses, according to Oryx, likely due to the Russian offensive in Kursk and forced Ukrainian withdrawal. When looking at heavy weapons only, the ratio is a bit better, but still the second worst month of the war. So there's a difference between heavy weapons and other weapons as well. Okay, so weapon losses in Russia's war on Ukraine. From Oryx, we've got Russian, Ukrainian, and the ratio of Ukrainian to Russian losses. So we have, as you can see at the end, there's slightly more Ukrainian losses than Russian losses, which puts the ratio just above 1. So it's probably almost 1.1 to 1 Ukrainian to Russian losses. And whereas sometimes you've got massively high ratios the other way. I guess the lower this blue line, the better it is for Ukraine. So that month there was one of the best months for Ukraine, but consistently below 1. In fact, there is no month that has been above 1. In other words, Russia has always lost more stuff than Ukraine in terms of weapon losses for the entire length of the war until you get to March. Okay, what's this heavy weapons losses in Russia's war in Ukraine? So these are, I don't know what the difference is between weapons and heavy weapons. I don't know how they define that, but it gives you kind of a sense of what's going on. That actually, still March was better for the Ukrainians and the Russians. So you still got every single month here being a ratio below one, which means that the Russians are always losing more than the Ukrainians. And I guess things like MRAPs, they won't be seen as heavy weapons. And of course, a lot of the losses in Kursk were down to mobility vehicles being lost, I think. So that's going to shift things in favour of Russia there. Let's see if there's any expansion on these ideas. Some caveats about the data. Russia is increasingly using civilian vehicles. Yep, so that is definitely something that we've seen. Cars and motorcycles for transportation to the front, reflecting lower losses in armoured vehicles but higher personnel losses. These numbers don't include drones, which are becoming one of the top factors on the battlefield. Nevertheless, given Ukraine's deficiencies in heavy weaponry and uncertain future about the scale and future of foreign military aid, this is not a good situation. I think Kursk, well, we're going to learn a little bit that there are some claims that actually the counterattack from Russia back down into Sumy from Kursk is potentially a real issue for the Ukrainians. Now, Ukrainian SSO operators have carried out 3 successful strikes on Russian Buk air defense systems in Kursk within 12 hours. So that's where we're talking about just then. Using FPV drones, they destroyed a Buk M2 launcher hidden in a forest and damaged the radars of 2 Buk M3 systems. I do wonder how many Buks the Russians have, whether they still have a library of these things or not, because these are quite consistently hit at the moment. Um, yeah, just out of interest, would like to know uh, how how commonplace these air defense systems are. But yeah, certainly to have 3 of them taken out in the Kursk area in just in 12 hours is excellent news for the Ukrainians. And here we have another Buk, and this is kind of why I talk about wondering how many they have being taken out in Luhansk um, a HIMARS launched rocket or missile, really giving a nice big bang there. Now, something else to note here: just the explosive power of these JDAM ER extended range guided glide bombs, GBU 62 JDAM ER bombs. 2 of them wiped out a Russian occupied building in Solidar, taking it almost to the ground. Solidar is north of Bakhmut. It's part of Bakhmut's larger kind of civic area. I won't, annoyingly for you probably, I won't play this video because I get into trouble. But one bang on the back end of the building, and then another bang on the front end. You can see um, just how much of an effect these bombs have. And then if we get a sense of what's left afterwards, yeah, that building is certainly a little bit worse for wear. And even the bits where the roof is still kind of hanging on, you can guarantee that stuff under there is absolutely bang-jaxed. So yeah, that is a building that's in a lot of trouble now. These guided glide bombs are very useful. Of course, the Russians are using these at ratios that are far exceeding the Ukrainians. But there is some data, someone was telling me as well recently, that the accuracy rate of the Russian guided glide bombs really is very poor. Um, so I guess that is something. Whereas the Ukrainian ones, as far as we know, are fairly accurate at the moment. Although there were some claims that even the Hammer, the French provided ones, were able to be interfered with to some degree by the Russians at times. It all depends where you're using these things on a front line and etc. etc. Right, Russian soldiers steal everything they can. It says Anton Gerashenko, showing a video here. Through any means possible. In the video, they're reportedly looting in the Kursk region. Now, we knew this right from the beginning. If you remember when the Ukrainians attacked uh, into Kursk and they got to the outskirts of, was it Koronovo, and didn't actually get in, and then there were all these videos of like shuttered up shots and CCTV of Russians looting these shops and apartments there, and it couldn't be blamed on the Ukrainians because the Ukrainians weren't even in that settlement, and yet here are the Russians coming to save the uh, their own, civilians of their own country. They're coming to save that town, and they end up just looting it. Well, here is just completely ransacked areas that have been looted by the Russians, and these, of course, are uh, their own citizens. I've written a lot about how in Russia, says Gerashenko, there's fear of their soldiers returning home because they kill, rape, and steal. Well, yeah, the demobilization threat is real. I mean, not just in terms of the economic impact of taking these soldiers back into their where they live, their settlements, and suddenly having this flood of people, and maybe not the jobs for them, and then being the draw on a welfare state, and reintegration issues, economically speaking, but socially, there's going to be a huge issue. There's thought that there could be massive resentment, and there could be a lot of psychological issues. That it's one of the arguments that's around a lot at the moment is that Putin wants to keep the war going because actually dealing with demobilization is too much of a challenge, and it's just counterproductive. So actually, just staying at war when you've got an economy fully on a war footing is a preferable state of affairs. Now, Ukraine is finding it harder to shoot down Kinzhal missiles as we move on to distant strikes. Finding it harder to shoot down Kinzhal missiles and other ballistic rockets as Russia upgrades its weapons and tactics. According to Yuri Ihnat, Russia has improved both its missiles and drones, including Shaheds, with new guidance systems and satellite navigation. So we have noticed, and isn't it, you know, the work we do or that I do and show to you gives us a daily. Yes, you can think, oh, really? Do we have to go through the figures on a daily basis? Do we, you know, I- what do we get out of doing all this? But actually gives us a really good indication, I think, of fluctuations in behavior, and in the reality of what's going on the front line, whereby we get a sense of exactly how many missiles are getting through on a daily basis and not, and we are seeing trends, and I tell you those trends. It's like, oh, hang on, it does look like interception rates have gone down, and we're used to seeing 95%, and that's definitely a change there. And all that's gone on for more than a couple of days. All that's now 2 weeks. All like, and then you start getting the official lines from the government here that actually Ukraine is finding it harder to shoot down hypersonic missiles and other ballistic rockets. So then, the question's always, well, if they run out of interceptors, are the Americans, make it harder to use intelligence or like satellite for target acquisition, etc., etc., or is it that the Russians have adapted? They're using better tactics. They're improving their munitions. We've heard that there are Chinese chips on the Shahed drones that mean they're more resistant to electronic warfare. So, we're piecing this all together, and this does have a real effect on the Ukrainians at the moment. I think that the lower interception rates with Shahid drones, and it appears with some of these missiles, is having an effect on the Ukrainians, both from a psychological and an economic point of view, and also assuming that they're having military targets hit, which I'm sure they are. It will have an effect on their military outlook too. So this is serious stuff. But hopefully, when you watch these videos in the morning, you're getting a sense of what's going on as quick as you possibly can, because we're looking at that data every single day in a consistent fashion. Ukraine is finding it harder to shoot down Kinzhal missiles and other ballistic rockets as Russia upgrades its weapons and tactics. So it's both a technological and a tactical adaptation that we are witnessing. Uh, so yeah, both in missiles and drones, new guidance systems and satellite navigation. That's a big problem. I think that this is huge. Um, Now, Russian propaganda obviously is always an issue, and it continues to hit new lows. This is concerning the strike on Kiev yesterday. I showed you this building yesterday morning, saying it looks like a sort of commercial industrial enterprise, and I was talking about how that building is massively damaged. So just the sheer cost of repairing that, and while that's being repaired, the loss of income you're going to get, and then the loss of jobs or whatever. These strikes have massive economic implications, and if that's happening multiple times across Ukraine every day in different cities, just huge impact on Ukraine's ability to continue to generate sort of money. So anyway, it turns out that that strike was it was on the office of the Freedom TV channel. The attack targeted Ukrainian international broadcasters, including UATV channels in the multiple languages and their digital editorial team. So that's a fairly sort of clever hit in terms of, if we're not being for or against Ukraine or Russia, just like thinking, okay, from a strategic point of view, what's going on here? And if that's the intended target, I can see quite a lot of sense in that, because that then hits the Ukrainian ability to disseminate information to their public. Russian propaganda, though, continues to hit new lows, says no reports after reporting that yesterday, saying Russian forces claimed to target Ukraine's central artillery base and defense industry, but in reality, they destroyed an office building in Kiev housing Ukrainian and state international broadcasters. So the Russians are claiming that that strike, if we can believe no reports and the interpretation here, the Russians are claiming that this was a strike on an artillery base and defense industry, but the pictures tell a different story. Again, assuming that there is a connection to these two. So yeah, and that's completely unsurprising. We saw with Kryvyi Rih, they claimed to have taken out a restaurant, and actually they killed 9 children and 19 people by hitting a residential area. As they said, it was a restaurant where lots of NATO people are meeting, and it's just absolute BS. And again, using cluster munitions in Kryvyi Rih in a residential area is just despicable anyway. I mean, that is a war crime. That should be followed up, and they should be prosecuted, and that should be on the top of the news items for, anyway, I'm going to rant, but you get my point. Right, Macron, the French leader, said, how long will Russia ignore peace overtures from the United States and Ukraine while continuing to kill children and civilians? So that is talking about Kryvyi Rih. He's expressed condolences after a Russian missile strike killed 20 people, including 9 children, in Ukraine's Kryvyi Rih. Now, brilliant. Right, this is what world leaders should do. What do we hear from Donald Trump? So during a self-imposed economic crisis, he goes and plays, I mean, I was going to do if I was at home, as you know, I'm away for a week. But if I was at home, I would be doing a video on how 4 American soldiers died in Lithuania. Sadly, their ARV overturned in a swamp, and basically they died. And the Lithuanians came out, and it was this national condolences from the Lithuanians. They gave such respect to the 4 fallen or 4 dead soldiers that it just really talked about, a sense of national pride in their own kind of setup, and not wanting to see stuff like that happen, obviously, but also respecting the American soldiers who are fighting with NATO forces in order to help protect Eastern Europe. And normally, in the times of Obama or Biden or whatever, or Bush, those 4 soldiers, when they were repatriated to the US, would have had the American president come and meet them at, what's the name? Anyway, the base that they get brought back to, the airfield they brought back to, the American president will welcome them back. What did Trump do? He went and played golf with Saudi Arabians. That's literally what he did. He was supposed to go there. He didn't go there. He went to play golf. And he's played golf 4 days in a row while there's an economic crisis going on. It's just absolutely sick. But here we have Emmanuel Macron picking up the slack and saying, this is disgusting. How long will Russia ignore peace overtures? Why is that rhetoric not being heard in the US? Honestly, it's absolutely despicable. Just absolutely despicable. Right, let's just very quickly see if there are any, if there are any, if there's any news of the daily strikes, because we are missing that at the moment. Just last ditch No, I don't think there is. So nothing, no news of strikes out, and it's already easily timed. Like, to be honest, that should have been 2 hours ago that we would have heard about stuff like that, and that definitely tells us that there's not been any strikes, and that's really interesting to have such a quiet night in terms of strikes from both sides. It indicates that I think there could be um, because we've seen from a Russian point of view that there have there was that night when there was none, then it went to something like 29, then it went up, and yesterday was not over 100 though. So even though it's like 90 odd, that was considerably more, and yes, considerably more than earlier on in the war. But in terms of what we've seen for the last 2, 3, 4, 6 months, that was somewhat lower, and then potentially no strikes last night. I don't know if there were for sure, but they're we've got two options: either the peace negotiations are having an effect, or Ukraine really have struck some Russian depots or manufacturing facilities that's harming their ability to send Shahed drones out en masse. Be really interested to know which of those two options. But there might be other options, but you get my point. Okay, moving on to other bits and pieces, Russia claims the capture of Sumy Oblast's border village. And Ukraine is calling it a disinformation campaign. This is what it's talking about. There are claims that counterattack of the Russians clearing out the Ukrainians in Kursk and then continuing that momentum coming down further to the south into Sumy is a proper issue. So there's a village called Bezivka that remains marked as a grey zone on the deep state monitoring map, indicating contested or unclear control. But Russia claims to have taken that village. Some people are saying that on my threads yesterday. The analyst says concern grows as Russians look to burst into Sumy from Kursk. My worst fears about the Kursk offensive being reversed when it would leave. Where it would leave Ukrainian forces in disarray and organized Russian forces victorious would then push into Ukraine. I said it last August, and that's now what's happening. So you can see the area that Ukraine did control, and now they only have tiny control, if any at all, with the Russians pushing down into Sumy. Reports of widespread civilian evacuations to the city of Sumy, a disorganized military trying to pull itself together after hasty and equipment losing retreat, are becoming clear. Quite how the Russians haven't already followed through is the only saving grace. Ukrainians report the frontline village is under heavy artillery attack. Everyone is expecting the worst to come. Nobody is sure Ukraine has the forces to hold it back. Some 60,000 Russians retook Kursk. Time is of the essence as Ukraine pulls itself together and another new front opens up. That's entirely their own fault, says the analyst. The Belgorod distraction aside, which may be all that's holding the Russians back until they're ready to move on to a wider front, Ukraine, of course, puts a brave face on, but the price of Kursk was always going to be high, and now it needs to be paid. It's not going to be easy going. So that's the analyst's opinion. Of course, take that with a pinch of salt. But it is certainly a worry. The Russians, because this was such an issue for the Russians, they absolutely loaded it uh, with troops, with personnel, and material. And of course, that will have had an effect on the rest of the front line. The rest of the front line could be a lot quieter. That culmination that we've been talking about for some weeks now could be as a result of those troops being redirected to Kursk. So that's good. Kursk was doing its job. But that now means that all those troops, rather than go back to the units they were previously with or the fronts where they were previously operating, are going to probably, with the wind behind their sails, continue their march southwards. Um, but then we hear this from War Translated. Meanwhile, Russian telegram channels are whining about the Ukrainian forces advancing in Russia's Belgorod region. So that's just up the road here in the Belgorod region, or down the road here, where the Ukrainians are having some limited success. So this is just, again, pinch of salt, just one Russian source here. Popovka district in Belgorod Oblast, temporarily occupied territory of Russia by Ukraine. This morning, southwest of the settlement, the armed forces of Ukraine wearing identification markers in the form of white armbands, so claiming there's perfidy here with Ukrainians claiming they're Russian soldiers with white armbands, launched an assault on the positions of the 34th Brigade. The latter retreated, surrendering their positions to the enemy to the depth of 600 meters. So there are claims that the Ukrainians have marched 600 meters further into Belgorod. Um, at the moment, the 155th Separate Guards and Naval Infantry Brigade, they've taken a pasting over time, of the Pacific Fleet is conducting an assault and clearing the positions occupied by the enemy. The enemy's opportunities for evacuation or reinforcement with reserves have also been blocked, so they're claiming that they have then sort of managed to um, counteract that, but the loss of some territory there is giving some consternation. But again, how serious is that when you are looking up the road to the Ukrainians losing territory in Sumy of, I assume, a greater amount. Okay, moving on from that, worth noting that a new Wall Street Journal poll has revealed a stark partisan divide on the US aid to Ukraine. 79% of Republicans oppose aid to Ukraine. Um, 83% of Democrats support it. Among all voters, 49% back continued aid, while 44% are against it. The gap reflects a broader shift in foreign policy views. Republicans are getting behind their leader. Republicans in general, according to this poll, and I know some of you out there will be like, I'm a Republican, I'm not behind it. Yep, absolutely. But as far as a generalism goes here, a generality goes, the Republicans, according to this data, are against aid to Ukraine. Of course, 79% still leaves 21%. So 1 in 5 Republicans are fine with it. But this does really reflect a massive partisan approach to the war. And I've always said that's so sad. It's so sad that something that should be so universally obvious has become a hugely partisan division in American politics. Now, oil prices have fallen more than 3%. They fell more than 3% on Monday, or are falling. This is a result of the economic crisis going on with regard to the trade war and the tariffs that one man has enacted upon the world. One of the silver linings to that terrible economic collapse that appears to be taking place, and we'll look at that very briefly in a second because I know it's not usual for this video, but the reason why I need you to know the context on the price of oil and the price of oil underwriting Russia's ability to continue prosecuting the war in the way it is. So oil prices fell more than 3% on Monday, extending losses from the previous week on growing concerns that global trade war could slow the global economy, and weaken oil demand. So almost always when you have economic recessions, energy is not demanded as much, because actually economic growth is kind of underwritten by needing more energy, right? To produce more stuff, and to be, people are using more things and just consuming more, and that's your economic growth, and that really can be translated into energy usage. Um, but when you're in recession, of course, that goes the other way, and energy usage therefore declines, and so the price plunges as they're trying to get people to buy more. Brent futures declined $2.1 or 3.2% to $63.48 a barrel at 10:27 last night, while US West Texas intermediate crude futures lost, etc., etc. Okay, both benchmarks plunged 7% on Friday to settle at their lowest in over 3 years as China ramped up tariffs on US goods. So, because China's now retaliating, and then we're looking at the EU retaliating, possibly attacking services rather than goods, this is going to get serious. It's going to get proper serious. We've got the analysts saying the oil prices is now critical. Russia's facing growing income decline. The oil price is now below what is sustainable. If this remains so, which is likely with the global economic slowdown and reduced demand for oil, Russia's economy and war machine are doomed. As long as there is no attack on Iran that spikes prices, Ural's crude selling at a sustained $10 to $15 lower, $49 to $54 a barrel, is a complete disaster for Russia. And they have to offer discounts to get buyers. Just remember that these new prices are for delivery 30 to 60 days in the future. So it takes time to feed through. Um, so, what we then have, we're just going to do this. US has spared Russia from its new worldwide 10% tariff policy. White House officials cited ongoing Ukraine peace talks as the reason. So, this whole thing about why Russia's not on the list has caused a lot of consternation because the White House keeps giving different reasons or kind of fudges the reasoning. Kevin Hassett here in what was, I think, a pretty disingenuous interview, if you see the whole thing, says there is an ongoing negotiation with Russia and Ukraine. It's not appropriate to throw a new thing into these negotiations right in the middle of it. Now, you can see some sense in that, but that wasn't what they said initially. And so you're thinking, well, therefore, you're just making up stuff. You're just trying to find the right answer. So really, what was the reason why Russia wasn't included on that list? And then, look, people saying, this is Erland here from Tochny, there will be a bloodbath on the New York Stock Exchange when it opens. Obviously, I'm recording this before that opens for Monday trading in the US. It could well be an absolute hellscape, economically speaking. Now, we have seen the Asian markets crash. We've seen UK and European markets crash. I think the FTSE 100 is down 6% last time I looked. Things are bad, right? And then there's going to be retaliations, and we are just about to enter a global trade war. This is not going to benefit anyone, and I wonder whether Ukraine, yes, okay, oil prices could benefit Ukraine, but the distraction of a trade war might well just screw over Ukraine. Maybe it could work to their advantage. I don't know. There are so many uncertainties, and that's the whole problem. Predictability is what global markets really want, and there appears to be no predictability at the moment. It's just crazy times. Bitcoin is also in trouble. Cryptocurrency market has fallen. 12.8% market cap falls. 12.8% in 24 hours. Total market cap of all cryptocurrencies fell to 2.46 trillion. By the way, in the Asian markets, they've had to put circuit breakers on and I think stop trading because things got so bad. So, things are really, really, really bad for the markets at the moment. Now, Trump was questioned about peace negotiations and whatnot, and unfortunately, he's like stuck record. He's like glitching just to say the same things. Like this war never would have started if it wasn't for Biden. If I'd been president, this would have never started, etc., etc. It's like, okay, yeah, great, Trump. We've heard that like 1,000 times. Can you tell us something else now, please? Because that's getting pretty freaking boring.
Who will participate, and where are we in terms of making progress in terms of peace? We're talking to Russia. We'd like them to stop.
We're talking to Russia. We'd like them to stop. I don't like the bombing. Brilliant. Thanks for telling us something, really deep and meaningful and something we didn't know there. I don't like the bombing.
Like the bombing. The bombing goes on, and every week thousands of young
people are being killed.
People are being killed, and it's a horrible thing that should have never started, would have never started.
It's a horrible thing that should never have started. It would never have started
if I were president, 100%. What do you want?
And the question was, who
participate, and where are we in terms of making progress in terms
of peace? Who will participate? Where are we in terms of making progress in terms of peace? And he answered that by not answering that at all. He didn't answer any of those questions and just talked about, oh, people are dying, bombing's horrible, this war wouldn't have started if I was president. Jesus wept, man. Like, answer the question and just give us something that indicates you know what you're talking about. Because I don't think you do. Ever. Ukraine will send a team to Washington next week for talks on a new US-Ukraine mineral deal. Kyiv seeks terms ensuring fair control over its resources while securing US investment. Talks follow tensions over a leaked draft. So there was, I didn't report this yesterday, but I was going to mention it. there was I've not heard the details, but apparently there's a leaked draft of the minerals deal out. Unless they're talking about the one previously, which they then refused to sign, which was kind of leaked. But they were apparently the Ukrainians were talking about polygraph tests for people to find out who leaked it and whatnot. So I presume that's a subsequent iteration of the minerals deal that's been leaked, but I've not heard any details of the leak or the draft. Now, Telegram is a messaging system that is used an awful lot by Ukraine and Russia. It's owned by a Franco-Russian who was then, if you remember, arrested in Paris, and then he's just been allowed to leave the country again. But there are certain conditions attached to him. He was for a long time prevented from leaving France as he's been investigated. Telegram's being investigated. Now coming from the other side, Pavel Durov, that's a guy that owns Telegram. Pavel Durov's Telegram appears to have started shutting down anti-Putin channels with large followings, such as a VCHKA OGPU channel. Now, you might go, so what? Who's that? Well, Chris Owicki, whose threads I love to share with you, gets most of his information from that channel. So I often shorten that down to a Russian Telegram channel instead of saying all those letters, because I can never quite work out how I should say that. But that's where he gets all his information from, and it's a really good source of critical information from within Russia and about Putin. And about the Russian MOD, and that is now being closed down. It's got 1 million subscribers, and it's complying. Telegram is complying with a Russian court order, so there's no free speech there. And kind of anyone that talks about there being free speech issues elsewhere around the world, but doesn't kind of mention Russia, where their loyalties lie. But yeah, and Chris Owicki actually then replies to this Yaroslav Trofimov statement saying it's actually worse than that. They've handed the channels and all of their subscribers over to people associated with the Putin regime. Quote, so it has finally become clear that Pavel Durov and Telegram began deleting channels at the request of the Russian authorities. Almost all the channels from this court decision were deleted last night without warning. The released links immediately ended up in the hands of people associated with the Russian authorities, which indicates coordination of actions. And you can imagine there will be recriminations against those people who were running those channels and gathering the information. So, yeah, that's a real issue, I would wager. Let's just finally see if there's anything concerning distant strikes overnight. No, not that I can see. Yes, so Tim White says that, because I was wondering, Tim White hadn't produced anything today. The luxury of a long, unbroken sleep for many in Ukraine as Sunday night passed off without drone or missile attacks. But yesterday started in the worst way. Yeah, so the night before obviously was pretty horrific. But last night, yeah, no drones or missiles. What underwrites that? What is the reason for that taking place? I mean, that's good news for the Ukrainians. Okay, that's enough from me. I really appreciate your support, guys. Thank you so much for watching. You guys take care. I don't know whether I'll have time to do another video today. If I will have time, I will do so. But in the meantime, take care of yourselves, and I'll speak to you soon.